In late 2023, one technology owned more than 80% of the network that wires AI chips together, Nvidia's InfiniBand. 2 years later, it's been dethroned. By the end of 2025, Open Ethernet had flipped it, taking more than 2/3 of every dollar spent connecting AIGPUs. The single most important shift in AI infrastructure happened in roughly 12 months. And here's the part Wall Street keeps missing. One chip, Broadcom's Tomahawk 6, the world's first 100 terabit switch, sits inside Arista's boxes. Inside the white box switches built to replace Arista, inside almost everything. The data center Ethernet market hit $32.5 billion last year, up 53%. Let's follow the money through the plumbing of the AI boom. Forget the GPU for a second. The real bottleneck in an AI cluster isn't the chip, it's the wires between the chips. Training a frontier model means tens of thousands of GPUs working as one machine. They have to talk to each other constantly, at the same instant, with almost zero delay. If the network stalls, your billion-dollar GPU farm sits idle waiting for data. So there are two networks in every AI data center. The front end, servers talking to storage and the outside world. And the back end, GPU, talking directly to GPU. The back end is the new gold rush. Latency sensitive, lossless, and growing faster than anything else in networking. That is the battlefield. For a decade, the back end belonged to InfiniBand, a proprietary Nvidia-owned technology, fast but closed and expensive. Then the hyperscalers revolted. In July 2023, AMD, Arista, Broadcom, Cisco, Meta, Microsoft, and others formed the Ultra Ethernet Consortium, a coalition to make Open Ethernet good enough to replace InfiniBand for AI. The UEC 1.0 spec shipped in June 2025. The result was the fastest standard shift I've ever seen in hardware. InfiniBand held over 80% of AI back-end sales in late 2023. By full year 2025, Ethernet had more than tripled and crossed 2/3 of the market. Nobody wants to be locked to one vendor for the most important wiring in their data center. Now, the second engine, raw speed. AI networks double their bandwidth roughly every 18 months, and that forced upgrade cycle is the whole investment case. The industry just moved to 800 gig ports, and 800 gig blew past 20 million ports in 3 years, versus 6 or 7 years for the previous generation. Now the next jump is here. 2026 is the first volume year for 1.6 terabit, with the majority of ports expected to hit 1.6 terabit by 2027 and 3.2 terabit by 2030. Every speed doubling means a forced rip and replace of switches, optics, and cables across the entire data center. This isn't a one-time build. It's a treadmill that resets every 18 months. That's why a boring networking business suddenly grows 50% a year. Let's put the field on the board. 6 US-listed names own this stack. Broadcom, a $1.9 trillion giant that makes the switch silicon and the custom AI chips. Cisco, the $480 billion incumbent, finally booking real AI orders. Arista, the $200 billion pure-play Ethernet leader. Marvell, custom silicon plus the optical chips that drive the lasers. Astera Labs, the tiny hyper-growth connectivity specialist. And Nvidia, which sells both sides of the war and owns the one piece nobody else can touch. If you're following this series on the picks and shovels of the AI boom, subscribe. Next up, the optical transceiver makers turning light into the fastest business in tech. Same depth. Start with a company that wins no matter who else does. Broadcom. Last quarter, it did $22.2 billion in revenue, up 48% at a 77% gross margin, among the best in all of semiconductors. AI revenue alone hit $10.8 billion, up 143%, with a $73 billion committed backlog. The CEO is guiding to roughly $56 billion in AI revenue this year. Broadcom plays both sides. Its Tomahawk 6 is the world's first 100 terabit switch chip, the merchant silicon inside Arista's boxes, and the white box switches built to replace them. And it co-designs the custom AI chips for Google, Meta, OpenAI, and Anthropic. Whether a customer buys the brand or builds their own, Broadcom sells the silicon underneath. If you want the cleanest bet on Ethernet beating InfiniBand, it's Arista. Last quarter, $2.7 billion in revenue, up 35%, with a 48% operating margin. Its EtherLink portfolio is built on the Open Ultra Ethernet spec, and it's the #1 player in 800 gig switching. Management guided AI revenue to $3.5 billion this year, more than double last year. But here's the catch, hiding in plain sight. Roughly half of Arista's revenue comes from just two customers, Microsoft and Meta. That concentration is the growth engine and the single biggest risk in one number. When your customers are also big enough to build their own switches, you're one decision away from trouble. Don't count out the old guard. Cisco is the comeback story here. It just posted a record $15.8 billion quarter, with the networking segment up 25%. The number that matters, AI infrastructure orders, went from a $1 billion target to over $2 billion last year to roughly $9 billion guided this year. Design wins at 5 of the 6 largest hyperscalers. Its Silicon 1G 300 chip matches Broadcom's 100 terabit class and ships in the second half of 2026. At a $478 billion market cap, Cisco is the slower grower. But it's also the one trading at a fraction of Arista's multiple, with an installed base in every enterprise on Earth. The market is paying up for the pure plays and almost ignoring the incumbent that's quietly closing the gap. 2 more names complete the picture, and they sit at the edges where the real scarcity lives. Marvell makes custom AI silicon alongside Broadcom. The two control almost the entire custom chip co-design market, plus the optical chips that drive roughly 70% of the world's high-speed laser modules. Revenue grew 28% last quarter. Data center is now 76% of the business, and the stock is up 247% over the past year. It just joined the S&P 500. Then there's Astera Labs, the smallest and fastest. Revenue up 93% to over $300 million a quarter. Its Scorpio fabric switch went from 0 to 15% of revenue in a single year. When the tiniest company in a sector is growing the fastest, that's where the next decade's fights are being drawn. Now, the elephant. Nvidia didn't lose this war. It's fighting on every front. It sells InfiniBand and its own Ethernet flavor, Spectrum X, now running over $10 billion a year. Total networking revenue hit roughly $31 billion, up 263%. And it owns the one piece Ethernet can't touch, NVLink, the proprietary link between GPUs inside a single rack, forecast above $25 billion by 2030. Then Nvidia did something ruthless. In March 2026, it spent $4 billion locking up the world's supply of EML lasers from Lumentum and Coherent, pushing every rival's optics lead time past 2027. You can design the best 1.6 terabit switch on Earth and still not get the lasers to ship it. The bottleneck isn't always the chip. Now, the honest column, because this story has 3 real cracks. First, insourcing. The hyperscalers are building their own white box switches. ODM direct sales grew over 150% year over year and now take a third of hyperscale port volume. That's a direct threat to Arista and Cisco, though Broadcom still sells the silicon inside the white box. Second, the NVLink moat. Nvidia's scale-up link has no Ethernet equivalent, and as long as Nvidia owns the GPU, it owns that layer. Third, optics supply. 800 gig lasers are running 40 to 60% below demand through 2027, and Nvidia just bought the scarcest piece. So the question isn't whether AI networking grows, it's who captures the margin and who gets commoditized. Where does this go over the next 1 to 2 years? Base case, the AI backend keeps growing toward $100 billion a year by 2030, with Ethernet taking the majority share. Probable, not guaranteed. 3 things to track. 1, the InfiniBand versus Ethernet split. Watch Del Oro's quarterly backend share. If Ethernet pushes past 70%, the thesis is confirmed. 2, the 1.6 terabit ramp. 2026 is year 1 of volume, so watch port shipments and which silicon wins. Broadcom's Tomahawk 6 versus Nvidia's Spectrum 6. 3, hyperscaler concentration. Watch whether Arista can diversify beyond Microsoft and Meta, and whether white box insourcing accelerates. Catalysts up. The Blackwell Ultra ramp. the first full year of 1.6 terabit, and co-packaged optics cutting power. Catalysts down, a faster move to white box, an optics shortage that caps shipments, or an InfiniBand resurgence bundled with new Nvidia racks. Upstream sit the laser and optics makers, downstream sit the hyperscalers spending $725 billion a year on capex. The switch vendors in the middle take a toll on every GPU connected. The chips get the headlines, but every one of those GPUs is useless until it can talk to the others. And the wiring that makes that happen just went through the fastest standard shift in the history of hardware. Ethernet dethroned InfiniBand in a year, speed doubles every 18 months, and a handful of US companies take a cut of every connection. That's the trillion-dollar plumbing behind the AI boom. I'm Big Z. Follow me. See you in the next deep dive.